We're going to move on to something else. We're going to try a two-topic discussion today because I feel like the one-topic discussions drag a little bit, so we're going to move on to something else. So Dark Brandon is getting another victory potentially. I'm not a Biden rah-rah guy. I didn't vote for the guy willingly. I voted for him under duress. And for the first year and a little over a year and a half, the first year and a half of him being president, I was proven correct in my disappointment with him being elected. But if we're being honest with ourselves, he's got some wins recently, and he's legitimately fun to watch interact with people. I don't know what drugs he's on or what drugs he's not on anymore, but Biden has come out swinging on a lot of stuff, and he's won quite a few victories recently, and he's got another one underneath his belt. The rail union is potentially resolving the impasse with the rail carriers, the rail companies that ship all our goods and services around in the United States. Biden has potentially swooped in the last second and managed to work out a deal. It's not finalized yet, still has to go for a vote for the union, but for now, a strike has been averted. And it seems to be almost exclusively because of Biden and his team. I don't think Biden did a whole lot, like specifically outside of sort of like approve getting the wheels in motion, but that's what the president does. The president doesn't actually do much of anything except point people in the direction of stuff that he wants done. So when the Biden administration or people involved, the transportation secretary Buttigieg was there, the labor secretary, who I don't know the name of off the top of my head, I'm not perfect, was there, and they were trying, and I think Homeland Security, potentially, I don't know, but regardless, there was at least a couple of administration officials there trying to work this out between the union leaders of the rail unions and the rail companies themselves. And it seems that they have pulled it off, that they have managed to stave off a rail shutdown, which would have been catastrophic for basically all the food in the United States. Like all the food in the United States gets shipped around on rail at some point or another, because outside of the stuff that you can float down the rivers, which there are a lot of rivers in the United States, especially on the east side, outside of the stuff that you can float down the rivers, you basically have to get food from the interior of the United States where it's grown to the coast, because that's where most of the people are, is on the coast, somewhere within a few hundred miles of the coast. So how do you get absolutely butt-ass loads of corn around the country? You do it on rail. Like, you could do it on trucks, but it's a lot more expensive on trucks. So you do it on rail. So a rail shutdown would have drove up the cost of basically every food on top of what it was already, on top of what the cost was already going up. So I want to be clear, though, despite the fact that this shutdown would have spiked prices, the union leaders and the workers are not the bad guys. No matter what you hear, they are not the bad guys in this situation. They are just the ones that are easier to push around. I'll tell you why. Because rich people pay for a lot of shit. A lot of rich people pay for a lot of shit that wealthy people, that less rich people, but still pretty rich, depend on. So, Warren Buffett owns a lot of stock. He also owns one of the rail carriers. So when you see his company in particular, I think it's BSNF, I think is the name of the company. When you see that company having a fight with rail workers, just know that Warren Buffett, top 5 richest people in the world, could end it by just giving in to the demands of the workers, which were reasonable. And instead, for 2 years, because this has been going on for 2 years, they decided to tell the workers to eat shit. Essentially, they were like, no, we're not giving in to your demands. Suck it up and get back to work. So let's talk about what they did that got us to this point. So, stock buybacks have run rampant in the rail industry. None of them were profitable. You know, I forget what it was. I think it was 40 years ago. None of the rail companies were profitable. But a rampant string of consolidations, because there were like a few hundred carriers in the United States, a few hundred rail companies shipping stuff around the U.S. And by the time all the consolidation finished, which was, you know, not that long ago, maybe 20 years, there were 7. It went from a couple hundred rail carriers to 7. So naturally, what happened is profits went up because of consolidation. It's just the way that it works. The more capital this is the way it works in a capitalist system. The more capital you can accrue, the more capital you have to play with, and the larger your actual profits are, even if the margins stay the same. If you make 2% on $1 million or 2% on $1, it's still 2%, but 2% on $1 million is, you know, my brain's turning off. What is it? $20,000. I wanted to say 2,000, but I was like, that's wrong. I knew it was wrong. So anyway, whereas like 2% of $1 is 2 cents. Like technically you made the same, but one of them is irrelevant. The other one is a new car. Well, most of a new car. So this is what happens when you consolidate. The small amount that each individual company was making gets concentrated in 7 companies, and then all of a sudden those 7 companies become profitable. Then those 7 companies start to cut costs. They don't drop prices, but they cut costs. And cutting costs while not dropping prices, especially on something that people need like rail, means that there's more money floating around in profit. And one of the ways that you, as a rich person owning a company, avoid paying taxes is to increase the price of your stock portfolio. So if you own, you know, $20 billion in stock, you have paid no tax on any of that stock until you go to cash it out. So that's how Jeff Bezos can afford a ridiculous lifestyle and not go broke, is because he'll take out, you know, say, I don't know what the numbers are off the top of my head, but say $1 billion worth of loans. So he's got to service the debt on $1 billion worth of loans. So he'll just cash out enough stock, pay the tax on that stock on the stock that he cashed out to service the debt that he took out to pay for his lavish lifestyle. So it's just this cycle of debt repeating. And as a result of that, he only pays taxes on the money that he spends, as opposed to the money that he earns, which is different from the way the rest of us work. So rich people can increase their wealth substantially by screwing with the stock price of a company. So if you own a rail company or any company that's publicly traded, one of the ways you do that is buying stock back, which lowers the amount of stock on the market. And by the effect of the way the market works, where buying of stocks increases the price of stock, if a company buys its own stock back, it inflates the price of the stock. So if the CEO owns 1,000 shares and those shares go up by 30% because the company bought a bunch of stock back, well, now all of a sudden his portfolio is worth a butt-ass load more, and he didn't pay any taxes on that money that he earned. So stock buybacks benefit the corporation, the owners of the corporation, by artificially inflating the price of the stock. It has nothing to do with the performance of the company. This is the criticism of Tesla, is Tesla doesn't actually build anywhere near the number of cars that, say Ford or Chevy or Toyota builds. I mean, Ford builds more cars in a month than Toyota builds in a year. And then some. But Tesla is worth significantly more as a company than Ford is, even though Ford makes more money, even though Ford builds more cars, even though Ford has more infrastructure. They have better supply chains. They have a whole dealer network. Granted, they're fighting with the dealer network right now over overcharging on cars, but they have a whole dealer network set up, a whole distribution system for parts. I mean, all this stuff is already in place for Ford. And Tesla has 3 factories that produce batteries. I think it's only 2 at the moment, with a third one being built, and a couple of factories that actually build cars. And yet they're worth, I don't even know how many times more than Ford is at the moment. And it's because people believe Tesla is valuable, not because it actually is valuable. And the belief that the stock is valuable is where most of Elon Musk's wealth comes from. That's why he's constantly playing the hype game for Tesla, is he's trying to hype up the stockholders so that way people will buy more stock. And if people buy more stock, the price goes up, and then his wealth and everybody who owns wealth in Tesla goes up tax-free. That's the game. So you can do that by buying a bunch of your own stock. It's called a stock buyback. And the railroads did a bunch of this. But the downside to it, because it seems like a win-win, you buy some of your stock back, the corporation owns a little more of itself, and everybody who owns stock in the company goes up, is all of that money that they spent on stock buybacks is now no longer in the hands of the company. So they can't spend it on wages, on fixing the rails, on better trains, on, upgrading the cars so that way they're not so freakishly old, and just general maintenance of equipment and systems, and buying new tools. Railroads take very specific tools to maintain. There is overlap between between the tools used for working on a car and the tools used for working on trains, but there's also a lot of tools that don't overlap at all between them. So most mechanics are not going to have the tools required to work on the rails. So the railroad naturally would have to supply those specialty tools, and tools break down, tools need replaced, and they weren't spending any money on it. And then on top of that, they fired a bunch of people, just furloughed 40% of all the rail workers in the country, just so they could cut down on costs. And then, as a result, they added this new system at BNSF, Warren Buffett's company, called HiViz. Right here. And HiViz is a scheduling system where the workers have to be on call 24/7 to hop on a train and take that train to its destination. And it's not 24/7. It's not 24/7. We're going to tell you, a day ahead of time, hey, pick up this train. It's you're on call that day. You wait all day for the train to show up. You can't go to sleep at any point in the day, because the train, when it shows up, if it shows up, you need to be available to get on it. You wait all day, and then 25 minutes before the train gets there at 11 o'clock at night, they're like, hey, we know you've been up for 16 hours already, but come get this train and take it 7 hours out west, or take it from the middle of Iowa and drive the damn train to Cleveland or whatever. It's like we don't let truck drivers do that. Truck drivers have to sleep. They have to stop driving after a certain amount of time and sleep. But the rail companies are making these engineers wait around all day, can't take a nap, can't go to sleep all day, waiting for a train to show up. And then the train shows up at like 11 o'clock and they're like doing overnight shift. And as a result, accidents by train have gone up. Now, not a crazy amount because, people tend to avoid trains, but they have gone up. There have been accidents. There was that accident. The passenger train that crashed a couple of years ago, and like the accident happened because the engineer was tired. He was like speeding up and slowing down sort of erratically. He wasn't like being steady on the stick with the train, and caused an accident. The train crashed. And then to top it all off, the high-vis system does not have a layover period. So let's say you did take the train. You got there just fine, no issues, and now you're exhausted. You're going to go to sleep. Well, if they have another train running the other direction to take you back home, you have to get on that train because you can't get home otherwise. The train companies don't give you a ride home. So say you've been up for 16 hours, then you take a train 7 hours. You take a train 7 hours to go to the destination. Then you pick up another train 3 hours later, and you take that one all the way back home. So at this point, you've operated a multiple hundreds of thousands of tons of cargo pulling on this train potentially. You've operated a machine pulling that much weight with next to no sleep, and you've been up for like 32 hours, 36 hours or something. Like it's asinine. And then you get home and you go to sleep. You've spent no time with your family, and then guess what? You get up the next day, they call you again, you're going again. And this has been going on for 2 years because they fired a bunch of people and don't have enough workers available to run to service all the routes. So they're just working the engineers that they do have till they die, essentially. And it literally is till they die because they don't get sick days. That's another thing. You're not allowed to take a sick day. There are no days off. If you take a day off, you have to work a certain number of days in a row to earn the time back so you don't get penalized for taking a day off. And the companies were making people work through COVID. And I don't mean through COVID time. I mean they had COVID. And rather than have them stay home like all the other companies would do that were considered essential, they were like, tough shit, cookie, get in the train. So that's the main issue. That's the main reason why they're striking. Or why the union hasn't reached a deal. They haven't gone on strike yet. But why the union and the train companies haven't reached a deal is because the union is like, we want days off. The workers are like, give us a damn day off. We want to be able to take a day off. We want to be able to have some time with our family. Our work-life balance is absolutely garbage. We can't even like get sick. We can't go see a doctor at all. They're not even allowed to take time off for a doctor. They're not allowed to randomly take time off for a doctor. They're not allowed to take time off, period, for a doctor. They work 7 days a week, potentially. They're on call 24/7 to hop on those trains. And this is the main complaint. This is the main reason why they're upset. So, now, there's a process for rail strikes because there's a law that deems that certain sectors of the U.S. economy are not allowed to strike unless they go through a certain process. And it's the ones that are deemed like super essential. So rail's not allowed to strike. I think you know what? I can't remember what the other ones were. I looked at it earlier, but it doesn't matter. point is there's certain sectors of the U.S. economy that are not allowed to strike without going through a certain amount of steps. So there has to be votes on potential deals with the carriers. If those votes fail, then there has to be a vote to strike. Then once the vote to strike happens, there has to be like a review process to get it passed, and then the president can send in a negotiator to write a contract that's supposed to be amenable to both parties with no input from both parties, and then present that as the forced contract. And they're allowed to vote on it. So the contract guidelines are not allowed to be voted on in this situation. But once the contract is written, then you can vote on it. And so the president did send somebody in. This was, I think, a year ago. I'm not sure how long ago it was, but I think it was about a year. Sent somebody in. They wrote a contract. The contract included a 24% raise, which is good, but it did not address any of the work-life balance issues. None of them. Just left it completely out. And that's the main complaint that the rail workers had, was the work-life balance was a shit. So the rail companies just simply would not budge, and then the person that the president sent out to write a new contract, they didn't give a crap about that. So they wrote one, sent it to the union, or sent it to the union for a vote. The union leaders were like, yes, we're getting a 24% raise. There were some provisions in there for some health care. This is cool. We should vote on this. We should take this deal. And then the actual workers were like, nah, I don't like it. And they voted like 80-20 to shoot down this deal. That set up the conditions for the strike because they had exhausted all of their steps. So one of two things can happen now. Now they can go on strike, or Congress can then force the contract through. So this power does not lie with the president. This power lies with Congress. So Congress is able to tell the rail workers and the union and the carriers, like, hey, here's your new contract, suck it up, get back to work. But it has to pass through Congress. So of course, a Republican senator decided to bring up a bill to force that union contract through that didn't include any provisions for work-life balance. And that was Mr. Richard Burr of North Carolina. He brought up legislation in the Senate to force the union contract to go through to avoid a strike. Now, it's not clear if this had passed, if it would have resulted in people going back to work or not, because what are you going to do? If every worker on the rail decides to strike and the government is like, no, actually, you're going to get back to work, and all of them could just be like, yeah, eat shit, and then not go back to work. What's the government going to do? Arrest the entire working force of the rail network? Like, it'll never get back up and running. You know, they can't do that. So, you know, it was basically political theater, but I think there is some legal teeth to Congress voting to force them to go back to work. But, you know, my man Bernie Sanders shot it down in the Senate and told Richard Burr, like, no, sir, no, thank you. We are not doing that. Go eat shit. Pretty sure Bernie said it specifically, go eat shit. You know how Bernie is. So once that happened, it then became clear that there was no will in Congress to vote to force the workers to go back to work. There was no will in the workers to accept that Congress would tell them to go back to work. So at the 11th hour, in comes Biden, forces a couple of his people in his administration to sit down and finally work out a damn contract. And it seems that after almost 24 hours of negotiations, literally coming down to the last possible moment the union leaders and the rail companies have worked out a contract that everybody involved seems to think will pass the union workers. And that is a pretty big achievement for the Biden administration, given the fact that this has been going on for 2 years and the rail companies had no intention of avoiding a rail shutdown. They were actively trying to just shut the whole operation down, basically play economic warfare with their own government, with their own country, just to try to save a few bucks so they can get a higher stock price and avoid paying some more taxes. Like, just absolutely ridiculous. Just disgusting levels of greed coming out of these rail companies. And to top it all off, rail companies are pretty heavily subsidized in the United States right now for like maintenance of rail lines and stuff like that because they're fucking important. In the United States, the government knows they're important, knows that is a very needed business, and these companies that run it were just like, we want to make a little more money, so suck my nuts. And to me, that's just unacceptable. It is insane that we as a country let that happen. Now, I know Biden doesn't have any control over how these rail companies operate to any extreme extent. It's not like he can just swoop in and take them all over. It'd be nice if the government would consider at least operating publicly funded competitive rail companies, much in the same way the post office creates an anchor to sort of like maintain halfway reasonable shipping prices, because the post office is a government agency that, has to be profitable, but in theory could potentially run at a deficit if need be if Congress decided to give them some funding. So it creates a downward pressure on shipping prices, because why would you send something through, a FedEx or UPS if you can send it through the post office and it's significantly cheaper? So I wish the government would at least do something like that, like operate your own freight company, just to sort of like level the playing field a little bit, like keep prices from going up ridiculous amounts, create a base of what is like the minimum expected for workers being treated like. But I don't think any of this is in Biden's power. So I think, given the context of what the president is allowed to do, I think this actually worked out pretty well, and I think it's a big win for Biden that he potentially averted a massive rail strike that would have just ground to a halt 40% of all the freight in the United States. Like, that's not a small thing. Do I wish more would be done? Do I wish the government would look at this situation objectively, see how the rail companies were trying to screw their workers specifically to like manipulate stock prices so they all can get richer? I wish the government would look at that and then fine all of those assholes into oblivion. But they won't. So, and it's unclear where the power lies for Biden to potentially do something about it or not. So, I think what we got was pretty good. I think it was a big move of him to potentially work out this strike and avoid it. So, it's been fun watching Biden actually get some wins and watching him actually wake up to the fact that, he has some power, he has some rhetorical weight to the things that he can say and the things that he can get done. And it's an uphill fight no matter what you do in the United States. Even if somebody with, clear visions for what to do, like Bernie Sanders, had been elected, he would also be fighting these same fights. He would also probably end up with milquetoast compromise laws. So, I think Biden's failings at this point, given what he's managed to get past with the opposition to how with the opposition that he's had, I think he's done all right, and he keeps doing all right. I don't have that many criticisms of legislatively. What Biden has done, foreign policy is a mixed bag, but you know, legislatively and as far as the U.S. economy is concerned, given the strength of the presidency,